What's going on, everybody? Kalibus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between two entry-level flagship phones, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the Google Pixel 6a. Now, neither of these phones are new. Both of them have been out for around a year, with the S21 FE being launched in January of 2022 and the Google Pixel 6a coming out in July. But throughout the last year, these devices have been really successful, and at this point, with them being so much more affordable, they really only seem to be getting more popular as time goes on. So I'm going to be going over some of the similarities and differences between the two to give you a better idea of which one makes the most sense for you at this point in 2023. Now, as always, if you do want to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting a 6.1-inch OLED display. This phone also has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 429, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in general, both phones have really good displays, and no matter which one you go with, if you're going to be consuming a lot of content, especially doing stuff like watching videos for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone here. But of course, there are a couple differences here. On one hand, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE at 6.4 inches versus 6.1, it is a little bit larger, and if you're going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing stuff like reading where you want things to be a little bit larger and easier to see, having a larger display might be a better thing for you. But on the other hand, I know a lot of people want a more compact device. And if that's you, the 6.1-inch display we get with the Google Pixel 6a might be a little bit better. So while I feel like for most people, the slightly larger display we get with the S21 FE might be a bit better, a case could definitely be made for a more compact device like the Google Pixel 6a. In addition to this, while both phones do have really good image quality, and again, you're really not going to go wrong with either of them, it is worth pointing out that I feel like the dynamic AMOLED display with the S21 FE is a little bit brighter, and with the 120Hz refresh rate versus the standard 60Hz refresh rate with the Google Pixel 6a, the movement on the screen with the S21 FE is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium to use. That's definitely not to say the Google Pixel 6a has bad image quality. In fact, compared to most phones you can get in this general price range, which at this point in 2023 is around $300–400, the image quality here is going to be quite a bit better than your average mid-range phone. But I still feel like compared to the S21 FE, the S21 FE just looks a little bit better. So overall, if you're really going to be consuming a lot of content, maybe you're watching videos or playing games a lot, for that kind of use, I feel like the S21 FE will have an edge here. But again, for the average user, the Pixel 6a will be perfectly fine too. Now, when it comes to storage, both phones are getting 128GB of internal storage, and also keep in mind, neither phone here has microSD card expansion, which, considering they are more entry-level flagship phones, is definitely not a surprise. So for the purpose of this comparison, the storage here is equal, but I do want to point out with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, there is another variant that has 256GB, whereas with the Google Pixel 6a, we're only getting this one. So if you are in a situation where you really need a ton of storage, then between the two, the S21 FE will technically have an advantage because, while again this phone in my hand does not have 256GB, it does have 128, you can at least get a variant that has more, whereas with the Google Pixel 6a, you're pretty much stuck with 128. But honestly, for the average user, 128GB is really going to be plenty of storage, so this most likely is not really going to be a big deal to everyone. But again, keep in mind, even though these phones do really have plenty of storage, they do not have microSD card expansion. And on one hand, if you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, I'm sure you're already going to be used to this, but maybe you have a mid-range phone right now and you're considering upgrading to a slightly higher end device like these. In that kind of situation, you might be disappointed here because if you're already used to using a microSD card, maybe you have all your information on one, transferring it onto a phone that doesn't have microSD card expansion is probably going to be a bit inconvenient. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, for most people, it's still probably not going to be a deal breaker. Now for security features, both phones have pretty nice in-display fingerprint scanners, but with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we do get Face Unlock, whereas with the Google Pixel 6a, unfortunately, this phone does not have Face Unlock, only the fingerprint scanner. Now on one hand, I feel like most people typically prefer fingerprint scanners anyway, so this isn't really that big a deal, but at the same time, I do still appreciate that at least with the S21 FE, we do get another option to unlock the phone besides a pin, so that flexibility is always nice. But starting with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, let's give the fingerprint scanners a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Google Pixel 6a. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no problems at all. Now for the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we get a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. For video, this phone can record in 4K in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see there. With the Google Pixel 6a, up front, we got pretty much the same design for the selfie camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 12.2 megapixel main camera and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. Then for video, the Google Pixel 6a can record in 4K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. So overall, these phones both have really good cameras. If you've seen any of my other videos about them, you will know when it comes to the camera, I am really a huge fan of both of them. And throughout the last year, I have used each camera quite a bit. But while it is really close and some of this is honestly kind of subjective, I feel like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does have an overall edge here. First of all, again, this phone does have a telephoto lens, whereas with the Google Pixel 6a, since it only has a dual camera setup, you will have to rely on digital zoom, which to be fair, is definitely not bad. In fact, compared to your average mid-range phone, the zoom on the Google Pixel 6a is actually really good. But that being said, in my experience, when it comes to zooming and getting close-up images, the telephoto lens on the S21 FE will give it quite a bit more flexibility. So if you are taking a lot of pictures, especially stuff where you want to zoom in a bit, or you want to get some close-up detailed images, kind of like you would with a macro camera, in those situations, the S21 FE will have an advantage. And in addition to this, again, when it comes to video, the S21 FE can record in 4K in the front camera too, whereas with the Google Pixel 6a, the video recording is limited to 1080p. Now, I don't really know why they did this, because in the rear camera, in my experience, the Google Pixel 6a actually has really good 4K video quality, but for some reason, they did limit the front, and on one hand, I feel like this is more of a situational kind of thing. For the average user, you might not ever even use 4K to begin with. But if you're, say, a content creator, maybe you're making a vlog, for example, in that kind of situation, being able to record 4K in the selfie camera is definitely a nice advantage. And overall, I feel like the video quality with the S21 FE is just a little bit better. And again, for the average user, this difference is really subtle. And at the end of the day, there's really nothing the S21 FE can do that the Google Pixel 6a can't. So if you're not really that into taking photos and you just want a phone that has a really nice camera, then honestly, these phones are pretty interchangeable, because while there definitely are quite a few differences, for the average user, they're not really that noticeable. But if you really do want to maximize the features and overall benefits you get with the camera, then I would personally go with the S21 FE. But I will say, one advantage the Google Pixel 6a does have is that between the two, when you're taking pictures at night or really just in low lighting in general, I feel like the Google Pixel 6a is like phenomenally good. Now that's not to say the S21 FE is bad. In fact, even in that kind of situation, this phone does still hold its own. I was just really particularly impressed with the Google Pixel 6a. I mean, the night mode on this phone is really good. And while I feel like the average user might not really be using that kind of thing all the time, if that is more of a concern for you, then definitely keep this in mind. But at the end of the day, if you are looking for a higher end device that's quite a bit more affordable than you would expect, that also has a really nice camera, then for what they are, these phones are honestly probably two of the best possible options. Now, to give you an idea of what they can do, here are some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. So again, definitely great quality here, and considering you can get this phone for somewhere between $300 and $400, maybe a little bit more or a bit less, depending on where you're getting it, compared to your average mid-range phone in that kind of price range, the S21 FE is quite a bit better than pretty much any of them. Even compared to something like the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G, the S21 FE is really just on a completely different level. So if you are after that flagship kind of camera experience, but you don't want to spend the money on something like an S23 Ultra, then a phone like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be a great alternative. And then here's some pictures taken with the Pixel 6a. Now I feel like the photo quality is really close here, and in the grand scheme of things between the two, they definitely are on pretty much the same level. But of course, photo quality is subjective, so definitely decide for yourself which one you like better. But in general, if you are looking for a more affordable device that takes really nice photos, either phone will be a great choice. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. With the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting 6GB of RAM here as well with the Google Tensor processor. Now when it comes to overall performance, it is really similar. In fact, I would say between the two, I wouldn't really use performance as a deciding factor here, because they are so close that there's really nothing one phone can do that the other phone can't. So in general, if you're looking for a phone that's pretty much a mid-range kind of price, but is much faster than any mid-range phone is going to be, then either phone here will be a great choice. That being said though, between the two, I have noticed with the Google Pixel 6a, the performance in general is a little bit smoother and maybe a bit more streamlined, but again, this is such a small difference that I personally wouldn't use it as a deciding factor, because with the S21 FE, I have used this phone quite a bit. In fact, I actually use it to record most of the videos on this channel for that matter, and I haven't had any performance issues whatsoever. So again, at the end of the day, both phones are really fast devices, devices. So if you are looking for a really fast phone for a really affordable price, either phone will be a great choice. Now I did run a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. As you can see, there's really not a significant difference between the two. On one hand, with the single core score, the S21 FE scored a bit higher, but the Google Pixel 6a scored a bit higher on the multi-core score, so at the end of the day, there's really not going to be a super noticeable difference. But again, these phones are both much faster than any mid-range phone. So if you are looking for a more affordable phone, but performance is really important to you, then you're definitely not going to go wrong with either phone here. Now for the battery, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging, and with the Google Pixel 6a, this phone has a 4410 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging. So between the two, there's not a huge difference here, but in my experience, both phones do have pretty decent battery life. Not quite as good as some of the mid-range phones that have 5000 mAh batteries, but they will get the job done in most cases. But between the two, the S21 FE is a little bit better at 4500 versus 4410. The battery size is really not that different, but in my experience, the S21 FE still does last a bit longer, and with 25 watt fast charging versus 18, while again there's not really a huge difference, the S21 FE will charge a bit faster. In addition to this, the S21 FE also does have wireless charging, whereas unfortunately, the Google Pixel 6a doesn't. Now if the Pixel 6a was a mid-range phone, this definitely wouldn't be a big deal, but considering this is more of an entry-level flagship phone, pretty much every higher-end device should have wireless charging. I mean, they have for quite a while now, so I don't really know why the Google Pixel 6a doesn't. But if you do want that feature, the S21 FE will have an advantage, but I feel like in the grand scheme of things, not that many people are really going out of their way to find wireless charging. It's a nice feature to have, but probably not something that should really be a deal breaker. But all the same, I am glad that we're at least getting it with the S21 FE. For the software, both phones do have Android 13, and considering that as Samsung and Google phones, these phones both have great software support. You can also expect to get several other major updates in the future, so if you are someone who really likes to have the latest version of Android, that's definitely not something you're going to have to worry about with these phones. Both phones do have NFC too, which is not surprising considering they are higher end devices, but just know, if you do like to use tap and pay, either phone can do it no problem. Now one thing that's kind of too bad about both phones here, neither of them have headphone jacks, which on one hand, again, if you're coming from a higher end device already, this is nothing new. I mean, flagship phones haven't had headphone jacks for quite a while now, but all the same, if you are coming from maybe a lower end device and considering upgrading to something like these, just keep in mind, phones at this level typically don't have headphone jacks, so to use normal wired headphones, you will have to use an adapter. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Honestly, this is a really hard one for me because I like both phones quite a bit, but I would say in my opinion, although you're really not going to go wrong with either phone either way, I would personally go with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. In my opinion, I personally prefer a larger display. Maybe not that much larger, but a 6.4 inch display in my opinion is a little bit better than 6.1. Ironically, my iPhone 13 I'm using to record this video, which is technically my personal phone, actually does have a 6.1 inch display too, and that's what I'm used to, but I feel like having a slightly larger display for most people is going to be better because I feel like a lot of people are consuming a lot of content, like watching videos, going on TikTok, Instagram, social media in general. So I feel like for that kind of use, the display size we get with the S21 FE is going to be a bit better. The S21 FE also does have a bit more flexibility in storage, because remember, you can get a 256GB variant, whereas with the Google Pixel 6a, it does have 128, which to be fair is definitely a great amount of storage, but if you need more than that, you're pretty much out of luck. And while both phones have great cameras, I feel like the telephoto lens gives the S21 FE a bit more of an edge. So if you're taking a lot of pictures and you want a bit more flexibility in your camera, definitely keep this in mind. And while the performance on these phones is pretty much identical, the battery with the S21 FE is also a little bit better, and again this phone does have wireless charging, whereas the Google Pixel 6a doesn't. But that being said, on the other hand, the Pixel 6a is definitely not a bad device by any means, and I feel like for most things in most situations, it's really just going to depend on which one you can get a better deal on. Because if you can get the Google Pixel 6a for like $300 and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going for like $350, even that small of a price difference, these phones are so similar in so many ways that I would personally just go with whatever's cheaper, because at the end of the day, the overall experience you get with either phone is pretty much going to be the same. But in general, if you are looking for an affordable phone for pretty much around the price of a mid-range phone, but you also want more of a flagship kind of experience with really good performance, a great camera, and a really high quality premium display, in that kind of situation, either phone here will be a great choice. Now again, if you do want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalip's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.